The ballerina, clad in her tutu and point shoes, she is instantly recognizable. Even those who have little understanding of classical dance know that the ballerina is a highly trained and accomplished artist, and that she embodies modern ideals of beauty and grace, seamlessly encased in a sleek and enviably toned physique. Throughout the 20th century, the ballerina was also an important cultural figure who influenced an array of other creative endeavors, one of the most important being fashion. My name is Patricia Mears, Deputy Director of the Museum at FIT and curator of the exhibition, Ballerina, Fashion's Modern Muse. Please join me as we discover the profound and enduring influences the ballerina had on modern high fashion, from the 1930s to the 1980s. Few art forms have been decidedly female as classical ballet. As George Balanchine, the legendary choreographer, succinctly stated, ballet is woman. Ballet was originally an aristocratic endeavor, codified by the French in the latter half of the 17th century, and dominated by male members of the court, including the king himself, Louis XIV. The first professional company, the Paris Opera Ballet, was founded in 1661, and for the next 150 years, ballet became increasingly professionalized and began to include more women artists. It was during the 1830s and 40s that ballet became the art form we recognize today. In addition to becoming more technically standardized and stylistically romantic, ballet was dominated by female stars who began to dance on pointe or the tips of their toes and don the gauzy skirt called the tutu. Both of these costume items were inspired by the fashions of the times. Fashion, however, did not adapt elements of the ballerina's raiment because of her lowly social status. For centuries, ballerinas were relegated to the margins of society and exploited throughout their careers. It was not until the wildly successful 1909 Parisian debut of the Ballet Russe that her circumstances in the West began to improve. That company, founded by Russian impresario Sergei Diaghilev, as well as the eponymous troupe led by fellow émigré ballerina Anna Pavlova, reinvigorated classical dance in the West and ignited a widespread and enduring craze for ballet, or balletomania, as it came to be called. So profound was classical ballet's impact that it asserted influence on many other creative fields, such as Hollywood films, painting and fine art, and, of course, fashion. Beginning in the early 1930s, the ballerina's signature costume, the corseted tutu, would inspire the most important couturiers. At the same time, ballerinas were frequently featured in leading high fashion magazines. Not only were their performances covered, the most beautiful among them regularly modeled the latest modes. The ballerina became such a popular mainstay during the mid-century that movie musicals, watched by millions around the world, often featured classically trained dancers. Films about the ballet world, such as The Red Shoes, made in 1948, made British ballerina Moira Shearer an international star. This greatest of all ballet movies featured a glorious array of costumes by the Parisian creator Jacques Fath, further solidifying the connection between ballet and fashion. Many of the couture objects in Ballerina, Fashion's Modern Muse, were designed and made in Paris. However, the popularization of classical ballet throughout the 20th century owes much to the British and Americans. Imperial Russian classical ballet would not only survive, it would go on to become the most popular performing art in the United Kingdom beginning in the 1930s and later in the United States starting in the 1940s. During that golden age, haute couture looked for the first time to classical works such as Giselle, Swan Lake, and The Sleeping Beauty for inspiration. The approximately 90 objects in the exhibition include a dazzling array of tutu-inspired couture gowns with bone bodices and voluminous skirts, and a choice selection of ballet costumes worn by legends such as Anna Pavlova and Margot Fonteyn, as well as stars of the New York City Ballet and the Dance Theater of Harlem, all interspersed to illustrate the undeniable impact of ballet on fashion. Also featured in the exhibition are American ready-to-wear separates based on ballet leotards and tights, and footwear ranging from ballerina flat slippers to fetishistic point-style high heels. Prior to the 20th century, it was exceedingly rare for a ballerina to inspire fashion trends. An exception was the Romantic-era star Marie Taglioni. The most celebrated dancer of the 1830s and 40s, she was a beloved and respected artist. Her respectability was the reason Taglioni's image appeared in fashion periodicals, and that an array of goods, from textiles to corsets, were named after her and the role that made her famous, La Sylphide. By the mid-19th century, as ballet waned in France, it began its majestic rise in Russia. Ballet became a supreme art form in the late 1800s. The greatest classical works were created, and Russian ballerinas gained international fame. Leading this elite group was Matilda Szyszynska, prima ballerina of the world's greatest company, the Mariinsky, based in St. Petersburg. A former mistress of Tsar Nicholas II, she was a woman with powerful friends who garnered great wealth, a palatial home, and amassed an enviable collection of jewels from firms such as Fabergé that she reportedly wore while performing. The importance of fashion was also understood by Szyszynska's younger colleague, Anna Pavlova. Also a product of the Russian imperial system, Pavlova would go on to become the most celebrated ballerina of her age. She took ballet's beauty and artistry to the far corners of the world. In doing so, she simultaneously elevated the artistic and social status of ballerinas. Pavlova was not only a peerless performing artist, she was an astute self-promoter who distributed thousands of images of herself clad in ballet costumes, as well as the latest fashions by couturiers and designers such as Mariano Fortuny. Also contributing to the rise of classical ballet in the West was Sergei Diaghilev's 1921 revival of the full-length 1890 masterpiece, The Sleeping Beauty. Although it was not a box office success, this Russian work was an important catalyst in the creation of British ballet culture. Along with fashion, the creation of English ballet coincided with the Romantic revival. The arts movement of the 1830s and 40s again dominated tastes during the interwar years of the 20th century. Prior to World War I, ballets such as Les Sylphides and Carnival, both choreographed by Mikhail Fokine for the Ballet Russe, had direct influence on the era's leading Romantic couturier, Jean Lanvin. Later, ballets such as Georges Balanchine's 1932 Cotillon also embraced neo-romanticism. The fashion world took notice as this production was covered in depth in Vogue magazine. Cotillon's star-covered tulle costumes by French artist Christian Berard likely inspired Coco Chanel, specifically her 1930s evening dresses that took their cues from the ballerina's costume. Although an avowed modernist, Chanel created a plethora of romantic, balletic-style gowns throughout the 1930s. Meanwhile, in England, Friedrich Ashton's 1936 ballet, Apparitions, likewise reflected the rise of neo-romanticism. The costumes designed by Cecil Beaton and fabricated by Barbara Korinska influenced British couturiers such as Charles James and Norman Hartnell, dressmaker to the royal family. Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was one of Hartnell's clients. His balletic gowns, photographed on her by Cecil Beaton, evoked the pre-war elegance and glamour of ballet costumes. Britain also produced one of the most famous ballerinas in history, Margot Fonteyn. Anointed a Dame Commander of the British Empire and, later, prima ballerina assoluta by Queen Elizabeth, Fonteyn was beloved by her countrymen for tirelessly dancing throughout the bombing of their nation during World War II. Later, she became an international star after her 1949 New York debut. While on that tour, she and the company's other leading ballerinas modeled the latest London fashion, simultaneously promoting British culture and design. Fonteyn understood that high fashion could burnish her allure and reputation. Although her dancing was a stellar example of the restrained British style, Fonteyn loved Parisian haute couture and became a devoted Christian Dior client soon after his debut in 1947. The exhibition presents several Dior objects from her enviable wardrobe, from severe but beautifully cut day suits and coats to lavishly embroidered evening dresses. Fonteyn remained a loyal Dior client until the couturier's death in 1957. Around the same time, as she approached the age of 40, Fonteyn began to contemplate retirement. The 1961 defection of Soviet star Rudolf Nureyev, however, redirected her career and led to their partnership, one of the greatest in ballet history. They soon became the rock stars of the dance world and together donned the latest youthful looks. In Fonteyn's case, she turned to couturier Yves Saint Laurent to provide her with an array of elegant daywear and flamboyant evening attire. Meanwhile, in America, ballet was on the rise. In 1948, the New York City Ballet was founded by Lincoln Kirstein and Russian émigré George Balanchine. Balanchine's prima ballerina, whom he wed in 1946, was Maria Tallchief. Of part Osage descent, she was one of 5 Native American women who rose to international prominence in the mid-century. Tallchief, the most celebrated of them, was the first American to dance with the Paris Opera Ballet and was reportedly the highest-paid ballerina in the country. Tallchief was also an exquisitely fashionable woman who, like Fonteyn, wore Christian Dior haute couture. So too did another American ballerina, Ruth Page. After dancing with the Ballet Russe and Anna Pavlova's company, Page settled in Chicago, formed a world-class school and company, and amassed an enviable couture wardrobe, thus living up to her own words, "Be adventurous, be chic." Not only did ballerinas embrace and influence fashion, so did Barbara Korinska. Born in the Ukraine, she was arguably the greatest ballet costumier of the mid-century, first collaborating with European artist-designers such as Christian Berard and Cecil Beaton in the 1930s. She moved to America where she went on to form a legendary collaboration with fellow émigré choreographer George Balanchine. Before embarking on a full-time costume career at the New York City Ballet, Korinska worked briefly as a couturier. Her innovations, such as long tutus made with different colored layers of tulle or silk netting, can be seen in the gowns by couturiers such as Charles James. Specific ballet characters also influenced fashion. Some of the most popular of them have been birds. No avian species has been as closely connected to ballet as the sinuous, long-necked swan. One reason has been the popularity of the Russian classic, Swan Lake. Likewise, in 1905, Anna Pavlova debuted what would become her most famous role, The Dying Swan. Choreographed by Mikhail Fokine, the work is only 4 minutes long. However, Pavlova's tragic depiction of this sensuous, white-feathered creature solidified the image of the ballerina as bird. In Swan Lake, ballerinas who mastered the demanding role of the Swan Princess, Odette, one of 2 roles danced by a single ballerina, inspired couturiers such as Robert Piguet, Pierre Balmain, and Pierre Cardin. Cardin was a great fan of the Bolshoi's prima ballerina Maya Plesetskaya, a celebrated Odette Odile interpreter, and traveled to the Soviet Union at least 30 times to see her dance. Odile is the second of the 2 roles in Swan Lake, danced by a single ballerina. For decades between 1895 and the onset of World War II, Odile was often dressed in an array of multicolored costumes before black became her symbolic color. After the mid-century, the name Black Swan became so popular that couturiers named their creations Odile, as well as Le Cygne Noir, or the Black Swan in French. Another important ballet that featured the ballerina as bird was The Firebird. Based on a Russian folktale, it was created in 1910 for the Ballet Russe. The Firebird was a vibrant, magical creature resplendently dressed in brilliantly feathered costume. Although the exhibition features a more contemporary version designed by Jeffrey Holder for the Dance Theater of Harlem, it retains the color and spirit of early reiterations. Coco Chanel's 1920s red evening cape echoes the look of the Firebird, illustrating fashion's growing influence on ballet during the interwar years. Another element as important to fashion and ballet costume design as silhouette materials and characters is color. Along with white, no color is as closely associated with ballet as pink. Over the past 2 centuries, nearly all knitted tights and silk satin point shoes have been rendered in pale hues, such as the warm flesh pink or a cool ballet pink, closely matching the skin color of most European dancers. While pink has long been a favored fashion color, it was during the 1940s and 1950s that the pink hues of point shoes and tights became increasingly popular, and these ballet pinks were readily incorporated into modern fashion. The colors white and pink also signify the lack of diversity in ballet. While a number of pioneering African-American ballerinas became top professionals, such as Janet Collins, the first woman of color to dance for the Metropolitan Opera Ballet and to be appointed its prima ballerina, Betty Nichols, the first Black student at the School of American Ballet and ballerina to perform works by George Balanchine, and Raven Wilkinson, first African-American ballerina in the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. It was not until the late 1960s that African-American women were able to build long-term, internationally recognized careers in ballet. One reason was the creation of the Dance Theater of Harlem. The brainchild of Arthur Mitchell, a pioneering principal dancer with the New York City Ballet, DTH was founded in 1969 in order to provide dancers of color professional opportunities that racism had long denied them. Among its early stars was Lydia Abarca. Ethereal and transcendent on stage, she was as beautiful as a fashion model. Another DTH star was Virginia Johnson. For nearly 30 years, she reigned as the company's prima ballerina, dancing leading roles on stages around the world and on television. In 2009, Johnson became the company's director, one of the few women to head a leading ballet company. Around the same time, Deborah Austin was the first African-American woman asked by George Balanchine to join the New York City Ballet. In 1982, she became a principal dancer with the Pennsylvania Ballet, the first African-American ballerina to attain that rank outside of the Dance Theater of Harlem. Austin's repertoire ranged from classical roles, such as La Sylphide and Swan Lake, to modern ballets, including a variation specially choreographed for her by Balanchine. It was during the 1970s that Capizio pioneered the brown satin point shoe for the Dance Theater of Harlem's ballerinas. Freed, the London-based company, now makes point shoes in a range of skin tones. These additions are significant in that diversity has become increasingly important in the world of classical ballet. Trendier colors associated with ballet also found their way into fashion. The Russian classic, The Sleeping Beauty, helped popularize 2 such hues. One was a vibrant blue, worn by the Bluebird and Princess Florine, characters who danced a technically demanding pas de deux. Their costumes likely inspired Elsa Schiaparelli's second signature color, Sleeping Blue, after her famous Shocking Pink. In 1940, the couturier crafted numerous sleeping blue garments and named her princess-inspired perfume Sleeping. The second color closely associated with the Sleeping Beauty is lilac, the signature hue of the story's savior, the Lilac Fairy. For centuries, purple was a color reserved for royalty. During the Victorian era, it became the color of half-mourning. By the 1930s, fashion embraced the newfound youthful spirit of lilac, thanks to the ballet. Ballet also influenced ready-to-wear fashion. This was especially true in America, the birthplace of mass-produced clothing. In the 1940s and 1950s, George Balanchine popularized modern ballets that eschewed elaborate and traditional costumes. His masterpieces, such as Concerto Barocco, The Four Temperaments, and Agon, were eventually performed in black, white, or very pale pink-colored leotards and tights, thus earning the moniker black and white ballets. Balanchine's choices highlighted his dancers' lightning-fast footwork and extended leg line. These spare costumes also mirrored the activewear worn with increasing frequency throughout the United States. They also reflected the fact that American ballet dancers and models were becoming increasingly tall, lean, and leggy. Women designers, such as Claire McCardle, created clothes for this new archetype. Along with Mildred Orrick, Tina Leeser, and Josette Walker, McCardle designed separates for the increasingly active and mobile American woman. Their innovations included wrap dresses and one-piece rompers and swimsuits that took their cues from both ballet and modern dance. Classical dancers also inspired the flat-heeled slipper worn by millions today and aptly called the ballerina. It first appeared in New York during World War II because dance shoes were exempt from the stringent wartime restrictions that made acquiring footwear difficult. Fashion editor Diana Vreeland is credited with introducing the idea of ballet shoes as streetwear in 1941. But it was in 1942 that Claire McCardle became the first designer to pair her latest designs with actual ballet slippers, in her case by Capezio. Capezio later collaborated with McCardle to make shoes that matched her clothing. The ballerina slipper was so popular that Capezio expanded their production of street-worthy shoes throughout the 1940s and 1950s. The intersection between fashion and streamlined dancewear reached its apogee in New York City during the 1970s. The creator who best expressed this phenomenon was Bonnie August, design director of Dance Skin Incorporated, then the largest dancewear manufacturer in America. August wisely appropriated select elements from the ballerina's class and rehearsal wardrobe when designing her easy, wearable day-to-evening pieces. The company's catchy slogan, "Dance Skin, not just for dancing," perfectly described the dresses and separates that moved seamlessly from the ballet studio to the disco to the street. New York City was in crisis during the 1970s. Despite rising crime rates, electrical blackouts, and near bankruptcy, the Big Apple was a cultural fantasy land where both dance and fashion thrived. One reason for this creative boom was increased diversity in both fields. Black ballerinas garnered rave reviews, while African American models graced the pages of fashion magazines and couture runway shows. Young black designers made inroads too. Stephen Burrows and Scott Berry were turning out jersey and chiffon dresses and separates that took their cue from ballerinas and disco queens alike. Ballet sway on fashion began to slowly diminish by the onset of the 1980s. Its great mid-century influence waned with the rise of youth culture and the simultaneous decline of formal fashion. Despite the changes, ballerinas benefited from the shifting cultural winds that elevated their métier and made them the crown jewels in the world of the performing arts. They have not lost the emancipated position bequeathed to them by earlier generations of dancers. Revering the ballerina, fashion's modern muse, remains an ethos we embrace to this day.